All right. Hey there, everyone. How's it going? Hope all is going well. Um, Hopefully a few more people log on for today. But if not, we'll just go through everything. It'll be recorded and up on YouTube later. Yeah. So today we'll kind of go over the all the requirements for the next project, which will be due next Friday. Has anyone double checked? Is that what it says for the due date on Canvas? Hopefully that all lines up. So yeah, it should be doing the 7th next week. So it'll be a pretty quick turnaround. So I suggest getting a chunk of it done over the weekend. And on Tuesday, we will be doing critiques. Okay, so on the previous project, it was not a requirement, but this project, it will be required. I think I'll just make the critique worth 5 points or something, just so I can check in on everyone's work, and then we'll do it on Zoom so you guys can get feedback and see each other's work and get some ideas as well. And then also on Tuesday, I'll show you guys some student work from quarters past that came out really well of the same project. Okay. All right, so let me go over just the requirements of this project first, see if there's any questions or anything. All right. So project 03. It's going to be very similar to the previous project. There'll be just a few other steps added in there. So it's called Mood and Contrast. So those are kind of the main things. So make sure if any of those moods were unclear last class, make sure you are checking in the critique, taking feedback, and let me know if you guys have any questions as you're working on this. So the first step will be to choose 3 moods. Okay, so I don't want you guys to choose moods that are too similar. So I want you to choose enough different types of moods so you get to try kind of different sorts of compositions, different use of shapes, different use of values. So don't choose calm, peaceful, and relaxing, because those are going to be all pretty much the same. You will want to choose some that contrast and some that are different enough. So choose like friendly, action, and strong. So those would be enough different from each other, so you have that variety. So of all those 8 ones we went over, kind of choose 3 that are different, 3 that interest you, and 3 that you want to make some art of. So 15 thumbnails. Okay, so I want you to choose these moods first. Okay, so 5 per mood. What I don't want you to do is just start drawing thumbnails, whatever it may be, and be like, oh, this kind of looks like scary. I'm going to call that my scary thumbnail. Or this one kind of looks like calm. I'm going to call that my my calm thumbnail. I want you to be drawing thumbnails that are specifically trying to use those different things we talked about. So for calm, using horizontal shapes and horizontal lines, using large negative space, using rounded shapes in there. Don't just kind of make up and assign a mood after you do a drawing. Assign that mood first and draw those 5 thumbnails. So this is going to be a new step here. Workup sketch. So our thumbnails are about 3 inches on the longest side. So the workup sketch is just kind of a step to go in between thumbnails and final artwork. The workup sketch will be drawn about twice as large as your thumbnails, so about 6 inches. So maybe it's about 6 inches by 3 inches. Okay, it doesn't need to be huge. Take up a whole piece of paper. It can be larger if you want, if you're comfortable drawing, more comfortable drawing larger. But usually the bigger you draw, the more time it takes. Okay, so a thumbnail should take not too much more than 5 to 10 minutes. But then a workup sketch that can take 25 to 40 minutes for a workup sketch. So you're basically just going to redraw your thumbnail and draw it larger. You'll refine your design, meaning make any sort of changes based on critiques that I or the class gives you. But the biggest thing on this step is you want to add in your values. Okay, so you need to draw with some sort of medium where you can get that range of values. So you should basically have everything figured out in your workup sketch before you go into the digital art. So when you're doing your digital art, you're not making up too much stuff. You're not adding new stuff. So everything kind of gets figured out during that workup sketch. And then the final art will be just the execution of everything you figured out. So then the final digital art, you'll have 3 pieces of those. So again, 3 moods. And then your written reflection. So some people did, not everyone. And then just remember to turn it in that PDF file. So 1 PDF file. Oops. Okay, and little things for presentation is kind of a place where some people lost points on the last one. Make sure all the fonts match. So your written reflection, whatever font, I think it's Arial 12 on the titles. So make sure that's the same size as the titles. Make sure there's good photographs of your thumbnails that I can see them, and then just make sure they're all in that PDF file together, okay? Because presentation is always important. I think it's like 30 or 40 points of the project. And it's something just to show that you take pride in your work. And I would say it would be better to have good art with great presentation rather than great art with bad presentation. Because if you're ever applying for a job, applying for an art show, applying for grants, if your presentation isn't up to snuff, they'll just toss that application aside. So it's just something that's going to showcase your work and show it off better. Make sure all your work is in clipping mask. Make sure your final art has frames around it, all that sorts of things. And make sure those font sizes and typefaces match as well. Any questions on any of this? All this is on Canvas. So if you need to get to this info again, you can do that. All right. Just remember, Critique Tuesday. You should probably have your thumbnails done by Tuesday. So I should at least be able to see all your thumbnails on Tuesday. And we can try and help you choose which one's best, which one you should take to the final for digital art. If you have more, if you want to go on to workup sketches, if you want to start your digital art, that's great. You can have more, but at least have your thumbnails for Tuesday. And I will make I'll make a little assignment where you guys can submit your files for that. So you'll either just take a picture of your thumbnails, or if you do have digital art, you can save it as a JPEG or something. Just a reminder, I forgot this. So this workup sketch is also in pen or pencil. So thumbnails, pen or pencil in your sketchbook. Same with the workup sketch, pen or pencil. Okay. So again, you will have to photograph those workup sketches with your phone probably. All right, so today we are talking about types of contrast. So all these types of contrast will just kind of create visual interest in your artwork. All these types of contrast can be used with any sorts of medium. So obviously we're using Adobe Illustrator for the most part, but you can also use it, you know, in any sort of photography, animation, drawing, things like that. So all of these will be applicable to any sort of two-dimensional art. And it really just creates visual interest. It will make your pieces more interesting to introduce some contrast. But also what it's good for is making your focal points stand out. So if you're able to really utilize these different types of contrasts, then it will make your work look better overall. Oh, yeah, sure, Allison. You can, I'm happy to offer some feedback on other work as well, if you would like to do that afterwards. So yeah, so here are the main types of contrast we will focus on. I bet some of you guys have used some of these already in your artwork. I believe we've discussed loosely valued contrast. We're going to spend some more time on that today, and then talk about those other ones as well. But value is going to be the most important. Value contrast is super important. That's what's going to dominate your artwork and really make that focal point super clear to someone. So let's start talking about value contrast, and then we'll talk about those other ones. Did we make a value scale in this class already? On one of the first days? I'm trying to remember. All right. Well, we'll if not, I don't think we did. Okay. A value scale is just very good. Then we'll make one today if we haven't. But if we had already, then it's just a good practice anyway. Value scale is just a good way to practice drawing those different values. So you guys can sketch this along with me. And this is also going to help us to just talk about the type of values we are using in a composition. So you guys may have seen value scales before. Sometimes there's value scales that have like a whole bunch of different stops on them. But I like just this 5 stop value scale. Kind of simplifies it. It's usually enough to kind of for our purposes. So this is just the amount of black in a given value. So 100% will be 100% black. Zero will just be pure white. And then we got just 25% increments. And the idea is to get like a smooth transition of values from light to dark when you're doing one of these. If anyone's ever taken like a beginning drawing class, this is usually like one of the first things you do in a class like that. For me, it's very easy for me to get these values close to exact. If you're drawing these yourselves, it will take a little bit more time to get that smooth transition. If you're drawing with pen, you know, you can build it up with hatching. So if you're doing pen for your workup sketches, on this next project, you will have to build up values this way. If you're drawing with pencil, it's going to be how hard you're pushing down to get those dark values. And you might have to go back and maybe erase a little bit or adjust those values as you're working to get them closer to what you exactly want, to get that smooth transition from light to dark. Okay. But anytime you switch to a new medium, so since this is digital, if if all of a sudden you want to start using watercolors or oil paints or a new type of pen or pencil, just doing a quick little value scale like this will help you to understand that medium a little bit better and understand how to get those variety of values. So after you get this, the main thing I want you to recognize with this, let's delete that, we don't need that. Is use all of the values. In every piece you make, you should have every single value in there at least somewhere. More often than not, I see people using this amount of the value. So just kind of using that middle bit of it. And it just kind of makes your art look a little bit more timid because black and white are such bold values because they're on the extreme ends of that value scale. You want to make sure to utilize that. And when you just use the middle, your image won't have as much pop to it. It won't be as bold. It will look a little bit more timid and things like that. I know we discussed for certain moods using, so like the scary mood, you will use mostly these values down here above 75, but you will still use a little bit of these ones. Okay, and for friendly, you'll use mostly these lighter values, but you'll use a little bit of the dark ones. So even if you're using one of those moods that utilizes light values or dark values, you can use a little bit of the other ones as well. And also just kind of getting used to what these numbers mean will make it easier when we start to discuss your work during critiques and just thinking about your work as well. I know some people have a little bit more of a mathematical mindset. This can help as well to kind of assign these numbers to different values. So I can look at a drawing and say, okay, I see that your background is a 25%. Maybe you want to lighten that up so it's closer to 0. Or, your focal point is a 75. Why don't you push that all the way to 100% black there? And it just makes it a little bit easier for us to discuss your work. So value contrast is the #1 way to get things to stand out. So value contrast is just having our eye will be drawn to the area of highest value contrast. So that's where there's a dark value against a light value. So here's a very dark value. I can put in some other values here of without as much value contrast. But if I want one of these shapes to really stand out, now I have that the highest value contrast. So there's a difference now here between this one, which is 0, and the background, which is 100. So that's 100 difference in value. Yeah, 100 difference there. Where here between this one, that's 75 to 100. That's only a 25 difference. So that's not as much contrast. Where these ones are 50 versus that background, which is 100. So they have more value contrast, but not as much as that one pure white dot there. So some people, I know some of you that have like, a little more mathematical, numerical thinking, if that's how your brain works, it can definitely be easier to think about those values as just different numbers there. All right, we're gonna just do a quick little example here. And we'll place in some values to to make this focal point stand out and create an overall good composition. All right, we got our little bat. He's flying above the trees. Got some clouds used as leading lines aiming at him there. Okay, so we want the bat to be the focal point. So one thing I like to do is just get rid of the white. So I'm gonna just put down a 50% gray over everything. There we go. All right, so then let's make the trees like a 75. So what value should I use for the focal point of the bat, you guys think? So that black is always bold, so I'll throw 100% here on the bat. I'll do almost 100% black because I still want to see some of that, the black line work on there. And then I'll put like a 25 on these clouds as well. All right, so now let's just look at the numbers we got here. So on the clouds, we got, clouds we got 25, sky is 50, bat is close to 100, and bushes are 75, trees are 75. So right now, the difference between the black bat and the background is 50. We got 50% back here and 100 here. And the clouds in the sky, that's also a separation of 50. So I want to increase that value contrast on the bat. So what could I put behind the bat there to make it stand out more? I want to put a nice light value. So I'm going to put a pure white behind the bat. Yeah, that moon, exactly, Allison. So we'll look at some art too, but you'll see moon used for value contrast a lot by different artists. You'll see clouds used as for value contrast. You'll see, you know, any areas of big. So now we have a big area of white right behind that area of solid black. So that's going to be the best way for that to stand out. And now we have the full value range in there. Now we have a little bit of every value. So now we got 0, 50, 25, 75, 100, all in there. So we got that full range of values now. And now this is the areas of highest contrast because we have 100 against 0 there. So now we have this 25 against 50 there. So that is a lot less contrast. So I can come in and I can put some more solid black in here. I can put some solid black down here in the shadows of the trees. And that's not going to take away from the focal point because there's only a 25% difference between black of the trees and the 75% gray there. Same thing with the shadow. I can put some shadows on the clouds there. Oh, that's more of a highlight. but it's just a little different. So it's not enough to make too much value contrast and make it stand out there. And overall, now our eye is going to be drawn right to that black against white in there. And that's why on the previous project, I said you had to have at least one shape that's pure black and one shape that's pure white in there. And this is going to go for, you know, abstract or representational. So I can choose to make one of these shapes stand out just by offering in some value contrast there. So make all these shapes about this color. And with abstract, you don't need to, you know, in the bat one, we were like, okay, let's make it a moon. But for abstract, you don't really need to do anything like that. You can just throw in another shape. So I'll just throw in a nice shape right here. Now that's going to be our area of highest value contrast. I'm going to push that shape on top to pure black. But it's the same idea, whether you're doing abstract or representational, your eye will be drawn to those areas of highest value contrast there. So this is the biggest one to master, the biggest one to think about. This one will really be, this is what will make your focal point really stand out. So this should be kind of your main priority when you're thinking about making that focal point stand out. It's going to be the use of value contrast. Our eyes are really just drawn to that type of contrast in there. So that is how things will stand out, and that will be the easiest way for you guys to make things stand out within your own compositions when you start working on those. So that's why I have the workup sketch as its own step on there, because when you do those thumbnails, I don't expect you to have full values on the thumbnails. You might just put a little bit of indication of where the darks might be. But once you get to the workup sketch, that's where I want you to really clearly place in those values and make sure the most value contrast is right there on your focal point. All right, so that's value contrast. Very important, but very, very powerful in your artwork. So now these next types of contrast, size contrast we talked about a little bit already, shape contrast we'll talk about more as well, busy versus empty, and straight versus organic. So these are all different types of contrast that they can all make your focal point stand out, but you may not use all of these in every single composition. You may kind of just pick and choose some that look good in one composition to utilize that. So let's draw a couple of examples. So we talked about size contrast last class. So I'll just quickly go over that again. Again, just making something seem big or small. So I may do this with characters too. So maybe you got, you know, a tiny little kid here. And then all these large adult type characters are surrounding this kid. So you're using that size contrast to show how small this little guy is here. So he will stand out because it is the one shape that's different. So that small shape that's different than all the other ones will stand out as a focal point. Then I'll further reinforce that focal point by adding some dark values in there as well. For this one, I think about to The House and Up, if you guys have seen that movie, where there's that one little tiny house and then it gets surrounded by all those large skyscraper buildings. Okay, it stands out because it's different than all those other ones. And we could then further that with value. So maybe this one, we want this to stay a light value and everything else in the composition to get dark. So you'll start to layer these different types of contrast on top of each other to make them stand out more. So it's never just going to be one type of contrast. It will usually be, well, you should always have value contrast in every piece, and then you'll kind of start to pick and choose some of these other types of contrast that can just kind of create more interest and reinforce a given focal point as you're working. Size contrast. What should we do next? Let's do shape contrast. So there's different, any sort of shape contrast is just contrasting the different types of shapes. So, you know, you can have round versus angular, you know, round or rectangle versus triangle. And then one I see a lot that is cool to use is simple versus complex. So these first two should be pretty simple. It's just the idea if you have a bunch of rectangular shapes, then this one triangle shape is going to stand out. So pretty simple, straightforward, but a good way to think about getting contrast into your composition. Same thing if you have a bunch of round shapes. Then this one rectangular shape is going to stand out. So that would be one way to make it stand out, and then I would reinforce that with value as well. So the most simple type of value contrast is when you have an overall light composition to just make that shape dark. So that's usually what I will start with when I'm thinking about value contrast. But simple versus complex is a nice one too. So I consider a shape like this to be a complex shape. It's unique, there's straights, there's curves, there's angles in it. If I want this to stand out, if I started making a whole bunch of these shapes, that one shape is not going to stand out. In fact, it's going to kind of turn this into one of those busy compositions we were talking about the other day. That's hard to see what's going on. But instead, I would like to surround this with very simple shapes. So now this stands out much better amongst those simple shapes. And they could be just circles, they could be triangles, any sort of basic, simple geometric shape. I see the simple versus complex a lot when creating images of people. So people are very complex shape. There's a lot going on. They create very organic shapes, things that are, you know, more difficult to draw. But now in order to make this character stand out, maybe I just come behind and put a very simple circle right behind the character, and maybe the character standing on some rectangular shapes. So now this becomes, the figure becomes a very complex shape. I'll just put it into a silhouette. So now we got that very complicated shape surrounded by more simple shapes as well. So again, there will be representational versions of this and abstract as well. And we talked about last class, you can combine some representational and abstract together if you want to experiment with anything like that. All right, so that's shape contrast. What other one do we have? Let's do straight versus organic, then we'll do busy versus empty. Actually, let's call this, put under a bigger heading, line contrast. Straight versus organic, thick versus thin. Okay, so straight versus organic. Straight lines, obviously, straight edge lines, anything like this. Things you see in man-made areas, buildings, roadways, boxes, anything like that. An organic line is just a very smooth organic line. So I usually think of this as a tree branch, as a line going around a human figure, a river, anything like that creates these organic looking lines. Anything that looks like it could come from nature. And again, same idea, make things stand out, but also gets just visual interest in there. So I find lots of times, I like to draw cities a lot, cityscapes, things like that. But I think when I draw a cityscape and it has too many straight lines, it becomes a little bit boring and it doesn't look as realistic like a real place. So then I think, and it kind of starts to look a little bit more like a blueprint. So I try and start to think to myself, what are some things I could add into this composition to get some organic shapes in here? What sort of organic shapes could I add to this? You guys have any ideas? Let's think. Yeah, let's add in some clouds. So that's a nice way. So now we get some contrast in there. Now we get some organic lines, and they're also a little bit more rounded shapes too. So that's really nice. So just adding that in already kind of creates some variety in there, and it makes something a little bit more unique in this composition. Clouds sometimes, so if you're drawing this from observation, sometimes you have to look closely and find organic things and maybe move them around. Sometimes I'll come in and add a little flag up here, flapping in the wind gets an organic shape in there. Maybe you'll get just the tops of a tree down here on the bottom. So now it looks a little bit more like a real place, because nothing is ever going to have all straight or all organic. Well, middle of a forest might have all organic. But that's why even, architectural designers and city planners will put in trees along a roadway or a sidewalk, because people can get kind of beat down by all those too many straight lines, all those non-organic shapes. And yeah, if I wanted to get real crazy with it, I could add in an organic monster type creature here. That's a big organic shape. So now we got this guy. Now he's really going to stand out too, because he's the largest organic shape in here, surrounded by all these straight edge shapes as well. There we go. So yeah, now we got a more unique, interesting thing, and we got the straight lines contrasting with that. So we've been talking about thick versus thin throughout the class. So kind of this next project is like all the things we've been learning about so far, but now we're adding mood on top of this, okay? So just very, very simply, whichever shape has that thickest line will get the most visual attention. So now we got that thick line in there. It's gonna stand out. It also kind of creates some value contrast because this becomes a big area of dark black next to the white of the shape there. I could put like a light gray over everything else. And now that creates some value contrast because we get the thick black of the outline versus the white of the shape in there. And that just creates more value contrast. All right, so that's line quality contrast. Oh, I'll just do one more quick example. So for organic versus straight, you may have an overly organic environment. And if you want something to stand out in here, you make it a straight edge thing. So put a little treehouse type thing here. Surround this with organic shapes. This one straight edge shape will stand out there. Throw some black on it for value contrast. And we got a pretty good, interesting composition now. And now our last one we'll go over is busy versus empty. So this is a very important one. Well, you can also think about this as a positive space versus negative space. So we talked about those moods as well. So making something calm, you want a lot of negative space. If you, but if you fill up that composition with too much stuff, then it will get that busy feeling. So, but it can be nice to contrast there. So let's say we want to make a calm piece. Okay, so we'll start with some horizontals in here to get that calm feeling. Put a little city down by the water, waterfront city. So it can be nice to have, even in a calm composition, to have a small little section that's very busy. So we'll say this section here is very busy. We got some city buildings, a lot of texture, a lot of patterns. We got some reflection in the water. We can have like tree textures here on the hills, mountains in the background. So this small little section is very busy, okay? But it helps to make all of this section feel more empty because this one section is busy. We can put a few little shapes up here if we want. But now overall the empty space is dominating and there's just a little bit of this busyness. So you kind of decide what you want to dominate. Right now, the emptiness is dominating. What you don't want to do, or what you can also do, is you can have the busyness dominate. So let's just take this little section down here. We'll get our buildings in here, create some busyness. our hills in the background. So this is overall going to be a very busy composition. So this, the busyness is dominating. Maybe we have this one little section, maybe we'll leave the bottom of this empty here. So even though this is an overall busy composition, we got that little bit of negative space and just a little bit of emptiness there along the bottom. Okay, but so this one, empty is dominating. This one, busyness is dominating. What you don't want to do is kind of have it divided in the middle. So this is where the rule of thirds is helpful. So if I kind of have this come right here through the middle, and I divide this exactly in half, not one of these is dominating. Okay, so busyness isn't dominating, or emptiness isn't dominating. It's kind of equal. So it's kind of hard for the viewer to know how to feel about this one. Do I want it to feel more empty? Do I want it to feel more busy? It's kind of hard for the viewer to figure out. So it's not making that mood as clear as you would want it to be. So negative space can also help your focal point stand out. So putting your focal point in that negative space. So let's say we had, you know, crowds of people down here. Got all these people standing up. Maybe it's like a concert or something. Very busy, a lot going on. We got this negative space up here, so I do not want to put my focal point down here. It's not going to stand out. So all I can do, build a little stage, put my focal point right there. So now this focal point is surrounded by all of this negative space. So you'll see there's a whole bunch in art where they put that focal point in the negative space. So again, we got another little city example. I throw my, especially if it's a small focal point, so we can have our little airplane is now the focal point above the city in that negative space. So you won't always be able to do this for your compositions, but it is a nice choice when it is an option to put that focal point surrounded by emptiness, because our vision will just be drawn up there. We'll see this one little shape in the negative space, which will help it to stand out. All right. And I can further this, simplify it, or help that to stand out, put a little moon or sun around there. Now we have a simple shape surrounded by all these complicated shapes too, which will draw the attention even more. So again, you won't use all of these on every single piece of artwork. They're just kind of more tools you can use to help make those compositions more interesting, and really to help make them make those focal points stand out more. All right. Let's look at some artist version of contrast. Okay, let's see. I like to do. There we go. Okay. There's a few type of contrasts going on in here. Do you guys see any that stand out to you, Allison or Laura? what type of contrast people or the artist is using here. This is the artist J.C. Leyendecker. He was an illustrator in the 10s and 20s, 1900s. Did mostly advertisements with his illustration. Yes, value contrast is huge. So he made the background that solid black, and then the brightest whites are the two people. So the two people are the focal points. And I believe this is an advertisement for these shirts. So the shirts are also bright white against the solid black. Their faces have highlights. The hair has highlights and light values on it. So that's starting out. So he started out with that value contrast and making that background solid black rather than kind of a medium value really makes the light values pop. Any other type of contrast you guys see in here? The one I like in this one is busyness in the foreground versus the emptiness of the background. So if this was a photograph or is this something in reality, behind these people and behind this desk, there would be a wall, other bookcases, the rest of a room, maybe windows. But the artist chose to not draw anything in the distant background because it would take away from the foreground and the focal points. So, and the focal points are pretty busy. There's a lot going on. There's patterns in the chair, patterns on the table, all sorts of stuff going on. So eliminating that background brings attention to the focal points and keeps the image from getting too overwhelmingly busy. If there was stuff in the background, it would probably get too busy and be overwhelming to the viewer and would take away from those focal points. And the reason he's making this illustration is to show off the characters and show off the clothes they're wearing. Okay. Here's another one by the same artist, same idea though, except this is dark clothes against the light background, but overall the same idea. This one I use to show shape contrast. So this is what I was talking about with complicated shapes of the people. The people become the focal points. Even if you were to fill these people in just as silhouettes, they would still be very complicated flat shapes. So the artist surrounded them with very simple shapes. The circle in the background, even the balloons are simple circles, and this shape that they're standing on the bottom is also a very flat, simple shape without a lot going on in it. So because these people are so complicated, everything else in here was made very simple. Oh, here we go. How about this one? This is by Frank Miller, artist of 300, Sin City. A lot of good comic books. But the main one I see in here is straight versus organic. So the human figure is the focal point, and the human, the cloth on the bed, the smoke coming from the cigarette, all of that are very organic flowing shapes. Then he surrounds that with the very straight edge shapes of the windows and the reflection of the window or the projection of the window coming through on the ground. So we got very straight, very straight, very straight, surrounding these very organic wavy lines and wavy shapes. Okay, so if he had put like draperies in this window and had organic shapes up here in the windows, or we had more smoke in the windows or clouds out behind the windows instead of shutters there, that would take away from the organic shapes of the character. Okay. Oh, here's a good one. So this is a PDF version of the book of The Art of How to Train Your Dragon. You guys have seen that movie. Very cool movie, but a lot of animated movies have these art of books. So it's cool to see all the preliminary art here of how they came up with the artwork for the movie. There's a few good examples that show some different types of contrast. So designing the dragons. This section is all on the dragons. So this one is really good for value contrast right here. So the this giant monster is the area of highest value contrast. We got the bright white of the flame and energy here against solid dark black of the monster. So our vision is going to go first and foremost right here to this guy. Okay, so that's where humans can't help it. Our eyes are drawn to that area of highest value contrast. So our vision's drawn right here. Once we look at this, then we can look around the rest of the composition. Then we can look at these characters over here. So there's some value contrast here between these guys that are solid black, probably like about a 50% gray over here. But there's not as much value contrast here. There's the most right here. This draws our attention first, and then we'll look over at those other characters. So this is just a really good use of that value contrast in order to move our eye around the composition and control what we will look at first. Same idea here. We first look at these teeth right against the energy and fire in the mouth and this crazy smile, and then we'll look at the dragon flying towards that big mouth. So most value contrast here, second most right here. So if you do have, so you guys may end up having more than one focal point in a composition. Usually you want to choose one focal point to be the most dominant, and then choose a second focal point after that that has a little bit less value contrast. Here's a good one that shows size contrast and uses scale to show the size of this monster. So this monster is huge. It's a huge monster because we know how big a boat is. Boats are already big. And then we see the size of this monster compared to this. This is a huge shape. This is a tiny shape, and they kind of contrast both to show how big that monster is. More designs for the dragons. And I like this one for another shape contrast. So we have all these organic shapes of the clouds here. And then this very angular shape of the wings will stand out against all those organic shapes of the clouds. But really cool book. If you guys ever have a chance to look at any of these books, it gives a good insight into how these movies were made, the type of art different artists did when creating these, and just kind of teaches you a lot about the process and what different artists are thinking about when they have to create these whole new worlds. All right. Okay, well, that is going to be pretty much it for today. You guys have any questions before we head out? Just let me know. I'll put this up on YouTube in case you guys need to review it, and so people who weren't here can watch it. And just remember, Tuesday we'll do critiques, so try and get all your thumbnails done by Tuesday. And we'll be able to look over those as a class. And if you want to do more than just your thumbnails, that would be great as well. You guys can also send me any work if you want feedback tomorrow or on Monday, and I can look at your work then before we get to the critique. Okay, so the projects we'll be doing, you know, a week and a day, so make sure you're working over the weekend and getting as much done as you can. All right, guys, have a good one. Oh, yeah, Allison, you want me to look at that? Just send it over Canvas if that works. I'll stay on here.